No.
TSN's Motoring 96 is brought to you by Quaker State. Exceeds the highest standards for engine protection. And Midas, the way it should be.
This week we are in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which is home to the biggest air show in the world. In fact, for 1 week every year, they tell me this is also the world's busiest airport. Ultralights, vintage, military, commercial, you name it, this is the place to be. This is also the place to be if you're a big fan of the Jaguar automobile. You see, Jaguar has introduced a new model, and we'll tell you more about that later on. But first, we're going to meet the man who has guided Jaguar Canada through the good and the bad times, and who has recently become one of Canada's most distinguished citizens.
I always wanted to be in this business, and right from the very beginning, and I still, leap out of bed every morning and thoroughly enjoy going to work, and it's the most fun business to be in.
John Mackie has been president of Jaguar Canada for over 21 years and received much of his career schooling in the British automotive world.
Where the British, I think, let themselves down so badly is that in the post-war years, business came rather too easily. We were a very export-driven economy. The major export markets, such as Canada and the United States, had a great appetite for cars, even if they were of indifferent quality. And life was really too easy. They made a lot of money and did very well, but the goalposts moved, and they didn't. And unless you can follow the goalposts, or at least be ahead of them when they're moving, which is the game that we're in now, we simply cannot afford to stand still in our business.
The Ford Motor Company purchased Jaguar in 1989. There were many who feared the consequences, but not John Mackie.
They are an extremely disciplined and a very process-oriented company. And what they have done has not sent an army of people in to do it for us. They have simply injected our company with their culture. We in turn actually have injected them with our culture as well. So the harmonization of the two cultures in terms of styling, positioning in the marketplace, which is what our strength is, we are still focusing very hard on that. One of the constants in life is change. And our particular business, the automobile business, has changed enormously. For too many years, perhaps, the supplier controlled the market. It was a supplier's market. That all changed in the prestige segment in the late 80s, and it has shifted permanently, in my view, in favor of the consumer, and long may it be so, because the consumer is now driving the market, which means the consumer has to be the winner.
Jaguar's share of the prestige market has been steadily increasing over the past several years, and North America has led the way.
We on this side of the Atlantic, in Canada and the United States, which is essentially Jaguar's home market, we sell, of the 40,000 cars Jaguar builds a year, we sell more than half. So we are, I always say to our chairman that, this is your home market, even though we're 3,000 miles away from the mother company.
One of John Mackie's biggest thrills came in November of last year, when he traveled to Buckingham Palace and was invested by the Queen as a commander of the British Empire.
The fact that somebody would care to give me, as the British say, a gong, I'm I'm very flattered and obviously very pleased. But you know, it is a fun business, and I am passionate about cars, and I like talking to people. I like meeting people. I don't have my phone calls screened. I love talking to my customers, God bless them. And I just say to anybody who's entering this business, it is probably one of the finest businesses you can be in. There are so many facets to it, in terms of marketing, in terms of engineering, even on the financial side and on the system side. It's going to be a fast-moving business, and the survivors are going to have to be imaginative, quick on their feet, but above all, they've got to have fun. I mean, if you can't have fun, it isn't worth getting up in the morning. And this business is fun, and I've enjoyed it all, and I hope to go on enjoying it for a bit yet.
Right here at Airshow Center.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It really gives me a lot of pleasure to be with you this morning for the worldwide reveal of Jaguar's new convertible XK8.
This week on Test Drive, we take a look at the latest edition of the original pocket rocket. This is the Volkswagen GTI VR6, a car that has the potential to brighten even the drabbest of days.
The secret to the new GTI VR6 is the power plant under the hood. At 172 horsepower and 173 pounds-feet of torque, there is no shortage of pull. Mash the gas pedal at just about any speed and this car scoots, and I mean quickly.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at one of the world's finest engines. This is a 2.8-litre narrow-angle V6. What's so special? The 15-degree V allows them to use a single cylinder head for both banks. The result? A V6 engine with V6 power in a package that's barely larger than a four-banger.
The clever design of the engine does not mean that it's overly technical. Indeed, there are only 2 valves per cylinder, which helps low-end punch, and the camshafts are driven by a chain rather than a belt. In the run from rest to 100 kilometers an hour, the GTI VR6 requires just over 7.5 seconds, making it one of the quicker cars around. This engine also achieves its peak performance whilst returning reasonably good fuel mileage. During the test, which by the way is not exactly conducive to producing the best numbers, we managed about 10 litres per 100 kilometres or 28 miles per gallon. Matched with the VR6 is a 5-speed manual box that leaves a little to be desired. The gear lever does not feel as though it is connected to anything at the other end, and second, the throws are long and ungainly. The fact that the clutch doesn't bite until the very end of its travel doesn't help things either. On a more positive note, the ratios are perfectly matched to the engine. The suspension features McPherson struts up front and a torsion beam axle in back. Befitting a car in this category, the VR6 also gets substantial sway bars at both ends. It also is stiffer and about 10mm lower than its 4-cylinder counterpart. Rough ride? Not at all. The comfort is all it should be given the sporting nature of the car. Large bumps are swallowed in stride, and much of the small stuff is effectively filtered out.
A lot of people say, why bother with a pylon test? Well, I'll tell you something, it's a lot of fun. But more importantly, this GTI demonstrates quite graphically just how good modern cars are when it comes to evasive maneuvers. People would never drive like this out on the open highway, but this car handles it very well. The only thing I'm noticing is that every time you push it hard into a corner, it lifts the inside rear wheel.
Helping matters a great deal is the precise rack and pinion steering and healthy 205/15 tyres. Stopping power is supplied by a 4-wheel disc brake setup that puts vented rotors at the front and solid in back. Anti-lock brakes are, of course, standard fare. The stops are both quick and highly controllable. During the usual brake test, it required just under 114 feet to come to rest from 80k. The fact that the ABS butts out until absolutely necessary is a huge bonus. The interior of the Golf GTI is typically Teutonic. In other words, it's understated, eminently practical, but very boring. Heater controls, wonderful. Radio, they get a pass, although some of the buttons are a bit fiddly. My criticism, in putting in an airbag, they deprived you of the glove box, meaning that interior storage is at a definite premium. Elsewhere, the VR6 comes loaded. Power locks, power windows with a one-touch down feature, a power moonroof, a trip computer and anti-theft alarm. I have a sneaking suspicion that this will be a very much needed item. On the safety front, the GTI VR6 comes with standard anti-lock brakes, dual airbags and side impact members. In short, all the necessary items. Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive and the Volkswagen GTI VR6. You know, this car is a wonderful machine. It's got one of the sweetest engines in the world and it handles like there's no tomorrow. The problem is, it's no longer a pocket rocket. Whilst it's still got the rocket to its name, you've got to have very deep pockets because of the price.
On one of those really hot days last summer, one of my customers had the misfortune of blowing the engine in his vehicle. Now, he was in the habit of making a daily check of oil and coolant levels, belts, etc., and he checked the vehicle that morning, knew that everything was in good order, yet the vehicle overheated really badly to the point of actually blowing the engine. Now, when the engine's all blown apart, sometimes it's pretty hard to piece back the evidence and figure out what it was that precipitated that problem. But in this case, it wasn't hard. As we got into it, it became quite evident. Now, you wouldn't think that something that insignificant, a dandelion seed, could cause a problem, but believe me, it did, and I'm going to show you just why. We've got another vehicle with the makings of just this kind of problem. Now, here's where those little devils enter, right here at the front of your vehicle, at the grill, where all the air that's pulled through your vehicle's cooling system enters, is where they get in. Now, in the case of most vehicles today, the majority of them have air conditioning, which means that your view of the front of the radiator is blocked by the air conditioning condenser. And in this case, this vehicle, and in that one I mentioned with the blown engine, the front of the AC condenser looks relatively clear. No debris or no significant debris clogging it. And at the back, your view of the radiator is covered by this plastic shroud. And in order to properly inspect the radiator, you actually have to remove part of this shroud. Now, I'm real lucky on this vehicle. The shroud comes apart really easy. It's made in 2 halves and only 7 screws to take the upper half off, and it gives us a lot of room to work on this cooling system. Now, I've also unscrewed the transmission cooler lines and the engine oil cooler lines from the other end of this radiator and removed both the rad hoses and drained the cooling system. Now, remember that the radiator is stacked up right behind the air conditioning condenser, and now it's just a matter of lifting it up carefully straight up and out of the vehicle. I'll set it over at the side. Now you can see those areas I was talking about. There's one right there, and down here at the bottom of the radiator you can see a lot of debris that's matting the front of this radiator. Now, believe me, this is not enough on this particular vehicle to cause an overheating problem by any stretch of the imagination. But that other vehicle I told you about, 75 or 80% of the radiator was completely matted with more of this debris. It was in much heavier buildup, but you can get the idea that it was enough to completely strangle the airflow through that radiator so that he wasn't getting proper cooling. Eventually it resulted in a blown engine. Now, it's a pretty simple deal to clean. Once you've removed the radiator, just use a garden hose without a spray nozzle or anything. Just low pressure, trickle some water through there and dust this stuff off easily with a paintbrush. Go easy because remember, rads are pretty fragile, and don't use high pressure like one of those steam cleaners or any high pressure cleaner because you can actually damage the rad. You can flatten over the edge of the cooling fins and turn them over such that it blocks the cooling flow again. So go easy, take your time, and you can make a proper repair of this. Now, when would you want to do something like this? Well, obviously, if you've had an overheating problem, this is one of the first things you might want to check. Or if you're about to embark on a trip to the southern states or some real hot weather coming up, good time to make a physical inspection of this and remedy the situation if you do have the beginnings of this kind of problem. Believe me, it can save you an awful lot of money. Maybe a complete engine rebuild could be necessary if you don't pay attention to this kind of thing. So till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 96.
It gives me great pleasure to ask you to join with me and welcome, for the first time, the new XK8 convertible.
When Jaguar unveiled the XK8 convertible and coupe at the New York Auto Show, it signaled a new era in the company's history. It was Jaguar's first new sports car in 21 years and replaced the classic XKE. The E-Type was built from 1961 until 1974, and in '61 cost about $5,000. The price tag on the XK8 will be closer to $75,000.
The customer then was a lot of college kids and recent graduates in those days who bought the XKE. I remember I was, I was 18 when it came out, in fact, and I wanted to buy one but couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford it for many, many years. But in this country, it was affordable for a lot of people. Today, probably older people, because quite frankly, what's gone into a car today is a lot more than went into a car back in the early 60s. And unfortunately, that technology costs. But I think very definitely this is a car that, as opposed perhaps to the XJS, will appeal to a younger segment, and we're certainly looking for that.
Well, I'm very, very excited because this is a piece of Jaguar history. It was at this show in 1961 where the E-Type was launched, and we are repeating history to a large extent by being here in 1996 for the reveal of the new XK8 convertible. So I'm very excited because it is a piece of history. We are launching in Canada in October. We would expect to sell roughly twice the volume of these cars versus the XJS in its first full year, and we are looking at 75% convertible to 25% coupe.
While some may equate the name Oshkosh with children's clothing, to aviation enthusiasts, Oshkosh is home to North America's biggest aircraft love-in.
This is our 43rd annual event, and last year we attracted in excess of 850,000 people and roughly 12,000 aircraft. We incorporate roughly 1,400 to 1,500 acres for our flying convention site, but we understand it is the busiest airport in the world for that 1 week, where we have roughly 2 to 3 times the aircraft movements of O'Hare Field in Chicago, which holds that distinction for the other 51 weeks of the year. The aircraft that participate in this event range from antiques, classics, home builts, rotorcraft, ultralights, light planes to the warbirds, aerobatic aircraft, rotorcraft, and the top flight military aircraft from America's current inventory. We think that there's something here for everybody.
What goes up must come down.
It's time to update our long-term Magic Wagon. Now, why a gas station? 2 very important reasons. First of all, the interlock Chrysler installed on this door have saved my bacon twice. My daughter's tried to open the door. See, 2 hands, meaning it didn't open, so it works. The other thing, in the States, Chrysler are recalling some 260,000 plus minivans of 1995 vintage. The reason? When you fill a plastic gas tank with fuel, you create a lot of static electricity. The fact that the tank is plastic, it's not grounded. You could ground the filler neck, but unfortunately it's housed in a plastic bezel. The result, the instant you introduce a steel nozzle, you've got a perfect ground strap and you go puff at the pump. Now the fix on this 96 is to make the filler neck out of plastic as well. Now you don't have a problem. On the 95s, all they have to do is to put a simple ground strap between the filler neck and the body. That eliminates this as the ground strap.
Disappointing sales and the popularity of sports utilities has spelled the end for the Mazda RX7. The company did not produce any 96 models, and only a few 95 models remain in dealerships. Industry analysts believe the sport utility vehicle has replaced the sports car as the new image vehicle. Other recent victims include the Nissan 300ZX and the Toyota MR2. The RX7 will remain on sale in Japan.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns a really annoying problem. I'm sure at one time or another you've had a situation where you've had your wheels turned extreme left or right when you parked your vehicle. When you went back to it and tried to unlock the ignition, there was a lot of pressure on that key and you couldn't rotate the key. You felt like you were going to break something trying to turn the key on. And in fact, you can break the key if you force it. Now I've got this vehicle turned extreme right. Watch what happens when I force the key. You're going to watch the steering wheel recoil to the left. Okay, it gives you an idea of how much stress was built up in that lock. What I really should have done is try the steering wheel. Even though it's in the lock position, you can get a little bit of movement out of it, that much right there. Turn it, take your left hand and turn it off the lock. It's trying to fight its way to the left, so turn it slightly to the right, the key will turn on really easily. Takes all that stress off the key and all the mechanism between the key and the steering column lock, so you won't break anything. That's your Midas tip of the week.
General Motors' new minivan. Are Ford and Chrysler losing sleep? I'll be right back on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
A few years ago at the New York Auto Show, the then general manager of the Chevrolet division, Jim Perkins, said that while General Motors was improving its products, he confessed, "We're not there yet." Well, we told him, "Jimmy, give us a call when you're there." Well, with the new Chevrolet Venture and Pontiac Transport minivans, General Motors says they are there, at least in this segment. Now, GM talked to over 4,000 minivan owners about what they wanted in their vehicles. Now, because Chrysler owns this market segment, most of those people were in fact Chrysler owners. And my question is, what would 4,000 Chrysler owners tell General Motors that 10 million Chrysler owners haven't already told Chrysler? Because after all, every car company does the same kind of market research. Now, the Venture has a couple of features that Chrysler does not have, the power sliding door and the dual channel audio system, which will be big hits with families. And they also claim to have made some strides in ride and handling, but let's face it, the Caravan is pretty good. Now, we've not driven the Venture yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But on initial reaction, it looks to me like General Motors has caught up to the pack. But you know, in the old days, General Motors used to be the company that everybody was chasing. I guess I'm waiting for the general manager of Chevrolet to say, "We're now out in front, everybody else has to come to us." I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, they're just towing this beautiful F-18 out to the runway. He's going to put on a bit of a show here shortly at Oshkosh. Unfortunately, we have got to go. Oh yeah, you ever wonder what some of these jet pilots drive when they're on the ground? Well, I talked to the pilot of this F-18. He told me I drive a Volkswagen Beetle. So there you go. That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
It's a fun vehicle for those that like Indy cars. It's a street legal Indy-looking vehicle that has well over 400 horsepower. It has a V12 engine, 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, and that vehicle will definitely get the sports enthusiasts excited.
So you have a flat tire in the left front.
Basically, it's a flat tire. It's the same as if the tire had a nail through it or a piece of glass that cut it, and the fact is there's no inflation in it whatsoever.
And when you're driving it?
When you're driving it, you can still continue to drive up to at least 50 miles an hour for a distance of at least 200 miles, and very, very little difference in notice of handling and the ride.
Who should dictate the test drive? Who should say this is where you're going to go and for how long? You or the dealer?
Oh, it'll definitely be me. If the dealer tries to persuade me to go his specific route, I will try and go mine, and if he then changes his mind and says no, this way, then I shall turn around and go right back to the dealership and say thank you very much and walk away.
TSN's Motoring 96 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Exceeds the highest standards for engine protection. And Midas, the way it should be.